I'd like to draw your attention to this sagebrush, which has just been assaulting my nose. It's the time of year here where the sagebrush is just incredible, and you can just smell it. The smell of sagebrush is all over, and so I wish that I wish I could give you this sensory experience, but you'll just have to live with me as I have the sensory experience. It's really wonderful, the smell of the sage here. Okay, so let's talk about tabs. Tabs are a relatively recent navigational widget, and in fact you may not have really, well, of course you've encountered them, but many users haven't really encountered them, and they still are trying to find their place. Will they persevere, or will tabs come and go? Another important lesson about navigational widgets is some come and go and some stick around. It's not the case that just because we use a lot of tabs now, we'll always use tabs. Tabs didn't exist at some point. Tabs may not exist in the future. And it's instructive, I guess, to think about that. Think about a book and the kind of navigation that we have in a book. It's very set, it's very stable. There are very few ways that we navigate a book, and those ways are common to all books. Was it always the case that the same navigation techniques were apparent in books? Well, it wasn't, and in fact, each one of those navigation techniques had to be invented at some point. The idea of a page number was an invented concept. The idea of an index was an invented concept. The idea of a table of contents is an invented concept. The web is so new and so prolific right now that all those concepts are unstable, and it's unclear to what extent they'll all be here in, say, 100 years or 200 years when the idea of an electronic publication really begins to stabilize. So I mention that in the context of tabs because they're a recent phenomenon. It's unclear whether tabs really are going to rule out, or whether tabs will be, you know, for us or even our children, something that is just an archaism. Okay, so what do tabs do? Tabs are dividers. Tabs are derived from this idea of a file tab, which is another example of, or another interesting thing to note in navigational widgets, that a lot of them have precursors in the non-electronic world. The idea of a file itself has precursors in the non-electronic world. The idea of a menu has precursors in the non-electronic world that bring up a world of associations that we can then map onto the navigational widget. Tabs, of course, come from file tabs. You open a file drawer. Inside the file drawer are a set of tabs. What's interesting about those tabs? If you look at them obliquely, you look at along the axis of the tops of the folders, you see that each tab is staggered, and you see that there's some dimensionality to that. You see that when you pull a tab forward, that all the tabs to the side are still behind it, all the tabs to the other side are in front of it, and that the tab you see now is continuous with the folder that you're in, right? That's the visual metaphor. That's the visual basis of the idea of a tab. On the web, when I click on a tab, that tab seems to come flush with the screen. Of course, we don't have dimensionality on the screen, but we try to represent dimensionality, and sometimes tabs are represented so that you can have this idea of depth, that the further away you are in the tab, the further they go into the screen, or the further they come out from the screen. But we've more or less given up on that because we realize that the spatial metaphor, that piece of the spatial metaphor, was not really necessary to the functioning of the tab. So usually tabs right now are just a flat ribbon, and the tab that you're on is continuous with the space below it, and all the other tabs are discontinuous. There's a little line under those tabs indicating that they're not continuous. Playing on our idea of the file tabs, but also beginning to morph our idea of the file tabs, because the visual appearance on the screen is not the same as the visual appearance inside a file drawer. So functionally what tabs do is they divide into major sections. And that's one of the things that has not quite stabilized about tabs, the major sections of what? And so now you'll see tabs used to be the major sections of the website, or the major sections of this part of the website, a subsection of the website, or maybe the major parts of a page, or maybe even the major parts of a part of a page. Anytime you want to divide into, here's the parent, and here's its major parts, tabs really can be used. And that can cause some confusion. We have levels of tabs. Exactly what am I tabbing here? What am I tabbing around or among? And so the idea of tabs really hasn't quite stabilized yet, but probably either it will stabilize or it'll kind of go away. So the other thing to mention about tabs is that the tabs can have subtabs. I can have tabs, under tabs, under tabs, and you can see in one of these images the king of tab use, and probably the organization that did more to popularize tabs on the web than any other one, Amazon.com, with its proliferation of tabs. We have tabs on top of tabs, we have tabs inside of tabs, we have subtabs and super tabs, we have tabs on various parts of the screen, and tabs are doing all the work to differentiate the parts from the whole. We have the whole site, and then the parts of the site are lined out in these various tabs. So that's tabs.